Chapter 16. Some Small Signs of Hope. In camp, we heard little about how the war was going. Our only news was rumor. Our main concern was simply to stay alive. The cattle car ride from Auschwitz had brought us to a camp called Kratzau in Czechoslovakia. We were met by the camp commandant, the leader who was wearing a skirt and white turtleneck sweater. It pained me to see her so clean and neatly dressed, for it reminded me of what I had once been. "Girls," she assured us, "this is a work camp. There are no gas chambers here." If we could believe the woman, this was a hopeful sign. She told us we'd be working in a factory with 900 other women. When we saw the barrack where we would live, we were amazed. The room was clean. Inside were 100 three-tiered bunks, each with a clean blanket and straw mattress. Unbelievable. Each of us were given a heavy blue-green metal pin that read Werk Kratzau. This proved to be one of the most important parts of our clothing, since it helped protect us against the cold winter winds. I put the pin at the neck of my dress to close it at the top to keep the cold from reaching my upper body. Conditions at Kratzau were grim, but they were better than at Auschwitz. It was good to be in a camp where there was no crematoria, where the fear of sudden death didn't haunt each prisoner. Of course, the women did not know that shortly after they arrived at Kratzau, exterminations at Auschwitz were halted. SS Chief Heinrich Himmler ordered the crematoria to be destroyed, and on November 28, 1944, the gassings ceased. The ovens were quiet at last. No more smoke billowed from the chimneys. Nearly 2 million people had died at this outpost in hell, but some, like Helen, had made it out alive to tell the story. The SS destroyed the crematoria because they wanted to leave no trace of their horrendous crimes. Day by day, Russian troops were moving closer. Soon they'd be at the very gates of Auschwitz. To keep the Russian soldiers from seeing the thousands of starved and dying prisoners, Nazi leaders ordered many inmates to move to other labor camps deep within the Reich. Although they were starved and sick, the prisoners were made to march without coats or boots in sub-zero temperatures, on snow and slush-covered paths. Toward the night, they were told to make a left turn, march 20 paces, and lie down. At dawn, those who could get up went on. Those who could not were shot and their bodies left behind. Huge numbers of people died during these forced marches. The labor camps to which the prisoners were sent were much smaller than the massive extermination centers like Auschwitz. In many camps, prisoners performed factory work, making parts or products to help the Reich. Often they had no idea what they were making or why. They simply did what they were told. Our job in Kratzau was to make small cylinders out of lightweight metal. We never knew what these cylinders were for, and truly we did not care. We had our choice of shifts. I chose the night hours from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. because the commandant promised us one extra portion of food on Sunday. My workday started when we gathered for roll call to get our dinner, soup, in which potatoes or a rutabaga had been cooked and removed. Guarded by 4 soldiers, we then walked, about 20 minutes, to the factory. The wintry scenery was beautiful, but the walk was gruesome, for it was unbelievably cold. Soon people began stealing blankets from each other, trying to protect themselves from the murderous winter chill. Some of the women, handy and clever, made underwear out of theirs, but then they had nothing with which to cover themselves at night. There was one special highlight on Christmas. That was the first and only time we had meat for dinner. The meat was a freshly killed horse, and it tasted delicious to me. For this special occasion, each person's meal was put into a separate brown bowl. On other days, 4 of us had to share one bowl. Of course, we had no knives or forks, no tables or chairs, but we did have meat. Trying to stay alive in the dead of winter was a fierce fight for survival. Each woman thought only of herself. Quickly, the prisoners learned that they had more to fear from each other than from the Germans. The worst abuse came not from the guards, but from fellow prisoners. Women who had never before been fighters now became violent. They did whatever was necessary to stay warm or get an extra bit of food. One unforgettable night, Helen scared herself by her own behavior. I was sleeping on the wooden boards of my bunk, covered by my straw mattress, when I was awakened by someone trying to pull it off me. I jumped out of the bunk, took one of the loose boards, raised it over the woman's head, and threatened her. Quickly she dropped the mattress. I stood rigid, shocked by my own anger. I'm sure I would have hurt or perhaps even killed her if she had not dropped it. Many prisoners behaved poorly in the camps. They stole bread from their fellow inmates and reported them to the guards when it was to their own advantage. Life was so grim there was no room for heroines. No one thought of helping anyone else. You thought only of yourself, of saving your own life. In each barrack, German picked one prisoner to be capo, or leader. It was the capo's job to see that prisoners behaved properly. Even though the capo was a prisoner herself, she was often cruel to her fellow inmates. In Helen's barrack, the capo was a huge Hungarian woman named Violet. Since Violet spoke only Hungarian, it was impossible for most of the women to understand her. Yet, if her orders were not followed, she became violent. One night, our meal was potatoes in their skins. Because they were hot, we had to carry them in the lower part of our dresses. We each got 3 or 4, depending on the size. Violet always watched us from the kitchen window at mealtime. This particular evening, when I spread the bottom of my dress to get my share, 1 or 2 of the potatoes rolled out onto the floor. As I bent down to pick them up, Violet suddenly appeared and boxed my head and face with her powerful fists. There were tears in my eyes, but they did not stop me from gathering what was mine. I picked up the potatoes and, in spite of my pain, proceeded to eat them. The lice at Kratzau was as bad as Auschwitz, for prisoners were never allowed to bathe. Day and night, each woman wore the same dress in which she arrived. There was never a change of clothes. To fight the filth, the commandant decided that prisoners would be taken to a delousing station, a 2-day trip by train. Everyone, including the sick and nearly dead, must go. Although it was the middle of winter, the women lived in open boxcars during their stay at the delousing station. The food shortage here was even worse than at Kratzau. There was practically nothing to eat. When they arrived back in camp, the prisoners found everything in the bunk rooms had been cleaned or thrown out in an effort to kill the lice. The precious wool blankets were gone, which meant that each woman now had only a straw mattress for bed clothing. Windows had been left open to let in fresh air, so the bunk room was absolutely frigid. All this work, and yet everyone knew that the lice would come right back. It was impossible to get rid of them. Why then, the prisoners wondered, had the commandant insisted on this seemingly stupid procedure? Soon, the reason became clear. We heard a rumor that a freight cart of food had been sent to camp by the International Red Cross. Sunday afternoon, we were each given a handful of white sugar that we held in our filthy hands and licked greedily. To our amazement, we were also given 1 can of sardines for every 2 women. These we ate with our dirty hands, but the sardines were much too rich for us to digest, and many of the women got sick. The next morning we were waiting in roll call when a car arrived with 4 women in green uniforms. Our commandant seemed to be expecting them, and she brought them in to see us. The women were shocked by our appearance, but they said nothing to us. Speaking in German, the commandant said to them, "Look at those pigs, how filthy they are, and be aware of the strong stench of these Jews. We have the most beautiful new showers here, which I will show you, but nobody takes the trouble to use them." The women, who were from the International Red Cross, walked away shaking their heads. None of them asked us a single question. The visit made me realize how little the Red Cross really knew or wanted to know about the condition of the prisoners. They seemed glad to get away from us after their do-good visit. A few days later, we heard that a shipment of shoes and some clothing had come for us. Like most of the women, I was still wearing the dress I had gotten 4 months ago in Auschwitz. The chance to change our clothes was very exciting. I was delighted to pull a jacket from the pile. but the shoes were a great problem. After a long search, all I could find were 2 patent leather men's shoes, one brown and one black. Still, they were better than nothing. At least they fit me. By now, most of Europe was suffering from severe shortages of clothing, food, and other supplies. War had been raging for 6 years. People were cold, hungry, and very tired of fighting. What food and medical supplies there were went first to the military. Little was left for civilians. Naturally, concentration camps were the last place to get medicine or shipments of food. Germany was on its way down, but so were we. Supplies for our factory were cut. Food for German citizens was short, and for us it was practically non-existent. Under these conditions, many of our women lost hope that they ever would see the end of the war. The intense cold, the shrinking food portions, and their own growing weakness made them want to die. When this state of mind took over, it was no more than 2 days before they were dead. We, the stronger ones, were ordered to bury them in a small cemetery on the other side of town. No names or dates ever appeared on their gravestones. One day, during roll call, I too collapsed. Supported by my friends, I made it through the line to receive my food, which I gave to them, for I was too sick and too weak to eat it. I was hardly able to use my legs, and I had no energy, yet I doubted that I could get into the hospital. However, when the doctor saw that the whites of my eyes were yellow, he decided I had contagious hepatitis and did let me come in. The hospital had no medicine, but at least you could rest on a straw mattress. You could also get some warm water to wash, and you didn't have to stand in line for food. I have no idea how long I was ill, for I slept most of the time. When I returned to my barrack, I was still extremely weak. Ellen did not realize, as she fought to recover from hepatitis, that help was on the way. From the east, Russian forces were marching across Poland on a mission to liberate the death and concentration camps. About 9 a.m. on Saturday, January 27, the first Russian troops reached Auschwitz, where Helen had been just 3 months before. German guards still left at the camp put up a fight, but by 3 o'clock that afternoon, the Russians had liberated both Auschwitz and Birkenau. The soldiers found an appalling sight. About 7,000 extremely ill prisoners were still left in the camp, but most of them were close to death. Scattered around the grounds were the bodies of 600 more, many of whom had been shot by SS guards that very day as the Russians came nearer. Nurses and doctors now began working around the clock to treat the sick and dying victims still left at Auschwitz. Hundreds were suffering from Durchfall, diarrhea caused by extreme hunger. So long had these prisoners been close to starvation that they had to be given food in small doses, like medicine. At first, they might just get 1 spoon of soupy mashed potatoes at a time. Gradually, the amounts would be increased, and the potatoes would be more solid, until at last people could eat normally on their own. Such strong survival habits had the prisoners developed in Auschwitz that it was hard for them to change after liberation. Nurses found bread hidden under mattresses by people who were afraid they would never get any more. Others refused to step in the shower, certain that they were entering gas chambers. Some patients, who needed shots of medicine, would not take them, for they knew the Nazis had killed people by injections. The prisoners' road to recovery was long and very hard. Many never recovered physically, and few, if any, ever fully recovered mentally. The inmates at Auschwitz were free, but for thousands more in other camps, liberation was still weeks or months away. At Kratzau, the woman heard a rumor that all prisoners were to be killed rather than turned over to the Allies. It made sense. The Germans wanted as few witnesses as possible. And so when the order came to prepare for another delousing trip, Helen and her fellow prisoners figured this was their final journey. We were taken to the same camp as before. Here a medical examination and delousing took place. Men in white uniforms who may have been doctors seemed horrified to see us all skin and bones. Our bellies were swollen with hunger, and our bodies were covered all over with bruises and black and blue marks. When it was my turn to be examined, one of the doctors looked at my swollen stomach and said, "She must be pregnant." My loud, clear answer to his ridiculous statement was, "This would be a medical miracle." In a few days, to our great surprise, we did return to Kratzau. It had not been cleaned while we were gone, and still showed all the traces of our constant diarrhea. The whole delousing trip had been ridiculous, because once again we were literally wading in excrement. But at least we were still alive, and where there's life, there is always hope. I began to wonder what the next days would bring.